I think academia has a huge role here to assist because, we can take a step back and look a little further in terms of, hey, what are the emerging threats in the future? Or what do we have to do to bring partnerships to a greater degree of capability? Or what do we need to do in terms of training the next generation of young people that are going to be able to address some of these really thorny issues?
Today, I'm honored to welcome our guest, General Paul M. Nakasone, a transformational leader in national security and cybersecurity. General Nakasone is a retired 4-star general who had dedicated nearly 40 years to military service, culminating as the director of the National Security Agency and commander of U.S. Cyber Command. During his time in uniform, he led some of the most consequential efforts in modern digital defense. He pioneered the now widely adopted strategy of persistent engagement, the idea of a more active approach to defending cyberspace while also strengthening public-private partnerships to defend against rapidly evolving cyber adversaries. Welcome to Quantum Potential, a podcast dedicated to curiosity and discovery. My name is Cybele Raver, and I serve as the Provost of Vanderbilt University. As a leader in higher education and as a social scientist, I believe that we can transform higher education for the 21st century. At my core, I am wildly curious about other people's work, whether it's in science, the social sciences, the humanities, or the arts. This podcast gives us the opportunity to break open new ideas through discovery and creative expression. Since retiring, General Nakasone has turned his attention to shaping the future. We're so incredibly fortunate that he came to Vanderbilt to found the Vanderbilt Institute of National Security, where he's developing the next generation of national security professionals who are fluent in both policy and technology. He also serves on the board of directors for OpenAI, contributing his expertise to questions of AI safety, security, and governance, as well as on the boards of Neuberger Berman Mutual Funds and Witness AI. A lifelong leader and learner, he holds degrees from St. John's University, USC, the National Defense Intelligence College, and the U.S. Army War College. General Nakasone is widely regarded as one of the most foremost voices on cybersecurity, digital warfare, and leadership in an age of emerging threats. We're so grateful to have him with us here today, especially given that he's launching today's Vanderbilt Summit on Modern Conflict and Emerging Threats, which now has, I believe, General, over 700 folks.
This is the first year we've had a sellout, Provost.
It's really exciting. Okay, so I'm going to jump in after welcoming you with this amazing sort of moment where we are celebrating and learning so much. Just to first ask, can I call you Paul?
Please, and can I call you Cybele?
Please.
Fantastic. Okay.
What a relief, right? It's
we've had success already here.
Great. Today, I'm so honored to speak with you about all of the ways in which your leadership has really transformed the way that we think about national security. I think we often imagine war with boots on the ground, but you've really helped us to understand cybersecurity, the way that in a digital age, threats look completely different. And I'd like to get soon to the things that drove you into this field or led you into this field or inspired you into this field. But first, I thought it would be great for you to just set the stage a bit to help us understand this completely new way of thinking about threat and ways in which that might come from cyber attack rather than from necessarily people standing at a border with weapons in hand.
Yeah, it's interesting because I entered the United States Army at the end of the Cold War. And we were pretty much a thought process of national security. You're either at peace or you're at war. And over a period of time, really 10 or 15 years, whether or not it's activities in the Balkans, whether it's 9/11, whether or not it's the discovery of Russian malware in our classified systems, the definition of national security has changed. And so it's no longer just this idea of how do you form international partnerships? How do you protect your borders? How do you have a very, very powerful military? It's this idea that there are borderless challenges. Mm-hmm. We've seen this. Think about 5 years ago, we were dealing with the challenge of a global pandemic. Right. This is the world in which we live today.
Fascinating. And in that regard, it immediately makes me flash on having to do my annual cybersecurity training for Vanderbilt last night, right, at 9 p.m. it also seems to span across corporate as well as government institutions, right? We're not only thinking about cities, we're thinking about hospitals, or we're thinking about, utilities, or we're thinking about our railroads. Can you help us also understand that kind of span?
Think about, these bright lines that we once had between peace and war that now are like, this line that's between public and private, or the line that's between academic and, public corporations, or it's a line between civilian and military. These lines are getting much, much more gray. And so as we think about this, whether or not it's, being able to deal with our cybersecurity, whether or not it's thinking about the ideas of a global pandemic or even climate change, we have to think differently about this. And we have to have critical thinkers that really understand the change of what's going on.
Amazing. I mean, clearly it's this huge cognitive reframe, right? This big mental rotation where we don't outsource or think about the military taking care of one world and, the private sector taking care of another world, commodities versus safety. But instead, you're helping me to understand at least the ways in which they're deeply, deeply overlapping, if not integrated.
I think that's one of the real appeals of quantum potential is you use the word curiosity.
Yeah.
So curiosity is one of the things that we've got to do a much different approach to thinking of these problems. How do we bring together radical partnerships? How do we think about our competitive advantages? How do we actually, bring the power of academia to address some of these really challenging issues?
It's great. So let's step back for a minute to ask you a little bit about how you ended up in this particularly incredibly important role in terms of your leadership, in terms of your transformational approach. Your parents immigrated to the U.S. from Japan. I think we share something in common. My mom immigrated here from Germany right after World War II. Tell me a little bit about what led you to this point in your life.
So my grandparents actually come from Okinawa, Japan, to the United States in Hawaii at the turn of the century. Convinced that they were going to make $1 million. And like many immigrants, they find out that it's much more challenging. My father, born in Hawaii, raised in Hawaii, actually watches the attack on December 7th on Pearl Harbor. And then 4 years later finds himself an interpreter in the United States Army because he had spoken Japanese in the home. And so he's there at the reconstruction of Japan. He's an educator. My mother's an educator. And so I have this great deep appreciation for education as I'm growing up. But
it's so interesting to just interject there to think that his dual language proficiency and capability, that notion of dual cultural identity and language was actually really important for national security in that moment, right?
And I think that's one of the things that we should always remember, that we have competitive advantages as a people, as a nation, that we should always be able to leverage. I think the interesting epilogue of the story, if I might, is last fall at the invitation of the Emperor of Japan, I was invited to an awards ceremony at the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. And I thought to myself, as I met the Emperor of Japan, I wonder what my grandparents would have thought. 3 generations ago, being peasants coming to Hawaii, their grandson now is meeting the Emperor. Pretty amazing.
Amazing. And also that as educators and as an interpreter, dealing with information and correct information, right? I'm just imagining your father translating and that idea of getting the translation right, or their role as educators, getting the transmission of information and the inspiration of, factual correctness, but also trust in information. That I'm curious about those themes.
Yeah, I think, the really interesting thing, Cybele, is that there was a culture growing up that, education was always revered. That, your idea of being able to look at a problem, understand the problem, talk about the problem, those were things that were very, very valuable. And so when I decided to make a career choice, when I went to college and I graduated from college, joining the Army, that was one of the things that I think really helped me, was that curiosity.
Amazing. And when you think about the image of your grandparents, looking upon you as you're meeting the Emperor of Japan, what is the thought that you think they would have had in addition to just huge, massive amounts of pride?
I think confirming their decision to come to the United States, the fact that education matters, the fact that, this really is a land of opportunity, those things were always kind of present growing up, but it certainly came back to me as I was thinking about that day.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, and congratulations on that moment. It must have been really, truly mind-blowing in the sense of how could this possibly be that I'm here? And yet, of course, this makes complete sense in some interesting way. In terms of thinking about being here, obviously, that moment also coincided with the culmination of your 30 years of military service, where your next move was often decided for you, I think, and as I understand life in the military. You then actually get this big moment of making a decision about where next, what next. And you decide to join us at Vanderbilt to help us in this endeavor of supporting students and thinking about national service and about cybersecurity, about, all the things that you are leading us in terms of thinking about national security by launching the Institute of National Security. So of course, why Vanderbilt? Why now?
Well, I had visited Vanderbilt twice during my last couple years in service, and I always enjoyed coming here to speak at the summit. But I have to be really honest here. When I retired from the Army, I was like, oh my gosh, I have some time off now. Fantastic. And a couple months into it, I received a call from the chancellor. And my thought was, oh, Chancellor, I'm really enjoying retirement. He's just come to Nashville. And so I would just right. And
that's how he gets us.
That's
all.
right.
Visit.
Just visit. And so I brought my wife along, and we had just a wonderful week in Nashville. And I could see that I knew that I wanted to give back in the next phase of my life. And what a better place than here? The appreciation for education, the freedom of expression, the city that's growing so rapidly, and just a history of being part of education and research. I wanted to be associated with that.
It's amazing. And I think the spirit that you communicated during those visits is so aligned with my excitement about transforming higher education in the 21st century for real, clear evidence for action. You talk about trying to solve wicked problems rather than simply writing white papers and storing that white paper in a journal somewhere. And not that that isn't a laudable goal, but it's not the one that I think is the most pressing or inspiring from my vantage as provost. And I just love that you are so committed to that action component, the way in which if the work isn't relevant right now, we may be less inspired to do it. Do you want to say a little bit about the wicked
I do.
problems?
I think, one of the questions I often get is, hey, Paul, why Vanderbilt?
Yeah.
Why did you go to Vanderbilt?
Yeah.
And I would say that the equation looks something like this. First of all, world-class university that's well known for its education and research. Second piece, a true commitment to freedom of expression, what is called here institutional neutrality. The third thing is this idea of, hey, let's be able to look at problems in the lens with different partners. What the chancellor calls radical partnerships is alive and well. It's something I'm very, very familiar given my career. And the last part is, hey, let's have pragmatic or practical solutions. Let's show something for our work. That was one of the things I think that always defined the organizations that I was able to be a part of. And so that was an appeal to me as I looked at Vanderbilt, as I looked at a brand new institution. I described it to one of my friends. It's like having a huge whiteboard and I get the markers and I get to color, and it doesn't matter in terms of what the history of the place was or preconceived notions. It's all new.
Yeah,
and that's really appealing.
Less siloed, right?
It is.
And one of those great examples, I learned that you are currently collaborating with another quantum potential podcast interviewee, Aaron Calipari, the wonderful neuroscientist that was just on a few episodes ago. I was really thrilled to hear about the ways in which you're working with her. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Aaron's new institute, her work with regards to taking a look at drug addiction, the challenge that we have coming back to this idea of borderless challenges with the flow of fentanyl and other drugs into our nation, and how do we look at it both from the idea of supply and demand? And the work that she and her institute have done really are very, very interesting. And the idea of, oh my goodness, we have different departments really kind of talking here and trying to get solutions. Where do you see that? Well, you don't necessarily see that everywhere in academia, but you see it here in Vanderbilt.
Yeah, very much, very much. I think a lot too about our launch of the new College of Connected Computing, our recent hire of Matt Johnson-Roberson from CMU as the new dean. I would imagine that the launch of the new college is a really great opportunity in terms of thinking about cyber warfare and thinking about some of the key issues that you really want to tackle, like ransomware. How does that look from your vantage?
It is, Cybele. Let me just take a step back and just pay thanks to Dean Krish and really the deans of Peabody and A&S and business, just because they were so welcoming to me.
Great.
I think that one of the things as we look to the future is, how do we bring this new college into the fold of what we know are really significant issues? And so having Matt coming from CMU, really looking at different problem sets, the folks that he's going to be able to bring and the ideas, I think will really work well, not only within Vanderbilt, but with what our institute wants to do in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I think in a recent podcast, you were talking about autonomous systems actually being at a point with large language learning models, essentially being at a point of being able to make decisions without the human involved, right? And I think that immediately raised such a fascinating set of questions in terms of what our future looks like as we continue to develop AI in ways that increasingly need us less, not at the workforce level of manufacture, for example, but at the decision-making level. And I just thought maybe you might want to talk a little bit about that.
I think that's an important question because it comes to this idea of really who are the players.
Yeah.
And I look at a Venn diagram. If I was going to draw it for you, there'd be a circle that says private. And that could be private companies, private citizens, it's just private.
Yeah.
The next circle I draw would be government. And it doesn't necessarily mean just U.S. government, it means government. And the third circle, well, third circle is academia.
Yeah.
And so bringing those three together, I want to see the intersection and make that intersection as large as possible.
Yeah.
Because for someone who had served for over 30 years in the United States military, I was always looking for people that could make that circle bigger. I think academia has a huge role here to assist because, we can take a step back and look a little further in terms of, hey, what are the emerging threats in the future? Or what do we have to do to bring partnerships to a greater degree of capability? Or what do we need to do in terms of training the next generation of young people that are going to be able to address some of these really thorny issues?
No, it's great. And I think that intersection really speaks to institutions like this one where collaboration is really the touchstone, right? Is really the coin of the realm. We love being able to have those conversations across those disciplines, across those different sectors. So that makes complete sense to me. And when you think about training the next generation, I love your commitment to working with undergraduates and our graduate students. Do you think that the largest portion of the work with our students is really informational and technical, or do you think it's something deeper about building trust and really helping them to understand service and public service? Is it really a kind of core value, or is it intellectual, or is it both?
One of the things I would share with you is that, first of all, our number one customer at the Institute is the undergraduate student.
Great.
It for me was like so refreshing to be able to go back into a campus, go into classes. I was in, Dr. Tom Sullivan's class this week on the intelligence community. I've been in Brett Benson's class and others, just to be able to share ideas. You've read the textbook. Hey, let me tell you how this really works in real time. In real time, right? Yeah. And so as we look at it from an institute, our vision is the premier national security institute that trains the next generation of national security professionals with the technical capabilities, the policy background, and the critical thinking skills to solve the toughest challenges that our nation faces. And so it comes back to this idea of, it's not just the fact that we need to have you smart in policy. Yeah. It's not just the fact that you need to be really good technically. It's the fact that you have to be a critical thinker. One of the things that I like to say is, in the future, I really want policymakers who code and coders who understand policy.
Yeah.
It's that, generation, this generation that's going to really be able to take on those two disciplines with really good critical thinking skills to be effective in this world.
Yeah, the connected,
right.
The connected computing, right? The connected between the ways in which students double major all the time here, right?
Correct.
Yeah, fascinating. I would imagine you see students who are phenomenal at being student athletes, who have an incredible level of discipline on the field, and who really want to commit that kind of level of discipline and focus on, in terms of service. There might be students from ROTC. There might be students who are really fascinated by politics and debate, but who find themselves really interested in foreign relations. Is there one constituency that really sort of rises to the fore as they come knocking on your door?
I don't think so. I think the constituency that we're looking for is just interest, right? Curiosity.
Yeah.
I was struck by, you had asked me about a constituency, and I remember meeting Candace Lee, among the first people that I met at the university, and just her passion to talk about intercollegiate athletics and the discipline that it takes, and not only her experience, but also now her leadership role here, it really impressed upon me. There are so many different constituencies here at Vanderbilt. I want to touch a lot of them. And even if you're not going to be a national security professional, to leave this university with an understanding of, hey, this is a little bit about how the world works, and this is how I find myself within this world. Yeah,
more sophisticated citizens with a greater sense of both the threats and the solutions.
Right.
Amazing. And how about that sense of trust in information more broadly, right? Increasingly, I think of old style civics as something that students feel is really not very relevant to the way in which information travels through their phones, through TikTok, through various other media, so that it becomes so high a volume of messaging and information that none of it is actually salient, right? It's all really, really epiphenomenal. How do you move students and faculty and professionals in the private sector to being able to trust information and to think about information in a way that really can vet that information for its value?
So I've had a little bit of experience with regards to trust. When I ran the National Security Agency, one of the things that I committed to was this idea of the American people had to have trust and confidence in this agency that had such tremendous surveillance powers and the leaders that led it. And one of the things that I found out was the way that you build trust is through transparency, is through communication, is through understanding not only what is of concern to obviously your constituents, but also what is concern to you. And so being able to talk about what we did, being able to say, hey, this was the benefit, and oh, by the way, this is how we protect your civil liberties and privacy, was inherent in being able to build that trust. And so as I think about just talking about information, one of the things is being able to understand where the information comes from. And that's why it's so important to be in a place where free expression is valued. Have civil discourse, being able to talk about it in a manner that isn't sharp or isn't shut down is one of the things that I think Vanderbilt should be incredibly proud of.
The Dialogue Vanderbilt certainly under Darren Reesberg and led by, of course, the chancellor. But also, I'm thinking a lot about Amanda Little and the work that she's doing in terms of civic engagement through student newspapers, right? How to create and leverage student journalism as an opportunity to be more engaged in creating really robust information channels.
Spoiler alert here. This is the Institute's summit, as you had indicated, and tomorrow we're going to hear from Sam Altman, who is the CEO of OpenAI, obviously one of the most important, visionaries on artificial intelligence that is in the world today. But one of the things that we're going to do afterwards is have a bit of a press engagement. And one of the folks that gets to talk to Sam Altman is obviously the reporter from The Hustler. So we're excited about that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah. I mean, I think just that idea that, how tech works and how information works often get treated as separable, but then you see absolutely that issues around privacy, issues around the transmission of information and disinformation are absolutely integrated.
Correct.
Yeah, amazing. And in terms of threats on the horizon in that space, do you have a sense of looking around a corner to see what we are most concerned about? We talked about elections in a past conversation. I know Josh Clinton was on Quantum Potential talking about building trust in elections. Is that continuing to be the burning issue in the space of...
Well, obviously a little less so now that we're out of the election cycle, but it will come back with the midterms. It'll come back with the 2028 presidential election. But I think taking a step back, as you talked about really the most, I think, powerful technology in the present and in the future is artificial intelligence. And so I think this idea of how do we develop artificial intelligence safely and securely? How is it ensured that the United States and its allies and democratic free peoples are able to do this is one of the things that I think is really pressing. And how do we ensure that we have not only the data, the semiconductors, the energy, and the talent to do this is one of the things I suspect Sam will talk about tomorrow. That's, I think, really the early term piece of what we have to be able to focus on. But let me also tell you that as we think about threats, I do think about the threats that we can't even envision now. I don't ever remember before March of 2020 someone saying to me is, hey, get ready for the global pandemic. Right. And so the global pandemic came at us. And so we had to be able to figure out how we were going to deal with that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's, again, a little part of the critical thinking that's so important for us to be able to develop in our students here and be able to develop for those that work with the Institute, because those are the skills that are going to allow you to address the next challenges in national security.
Yes. I think you spoke about the preparing for the unknowns, right? The unknowable unknowns. And I'd love to come back to that. I think let's take a little break and we'll be back. Welcome back. We're here at Quantum Potential and having an amazing conversation about national security, particularly in an age of AI and digital integration of both the public and the private sector. And we're speaking with General Paul Nakasone, and we're really thrilled to have you and really excited to continue the conversation. So, Paul, would you tell us a little bit about the Wicked Problems Lab? I'm very fascinated by this idea of really tackling a problem and wrestling it to the ground in vivo, rather than a model that might yield an outcome or solution 10 years or 15 years hence.
And again, I think this speaks to the power of Vanderbilt University of being able to realize that you have to take radical partnerships with new, curious ideas to be able to get after outcomes. Our thought here is, let's bring together a series of people that are looking at a challenge, whether or not they're from government or the private sector, or whether or not they're from academia, and say, hey, what can we do collectively to be able to get after this? We're very interested in ransomware. We're very, very interested in being able to secure our critical infrastructure.
And tell everybody a little bit about how ransomware works.
Yeah, just think about a criminal. Let's return to, the spring of 2021, and we find that Colonial Pipeline has been hit by ransomware attack from someplace in Russia. And this ransomware, while it wasn't really that effective, made the company shut down their entire operations for a series of days. Now, Colonial Pipeline, many of us had no idea that it controls 43% of the petroleum products on the East Coast.
Wow.
Think about the impact that has on our economy, our daily life, normal citizens. And it is this idea here that we've got to be able to have a way of being able to prevent this. And
that's such a fascinating example, just to interject, because I think of ransomware affecting data systems in hospitals or at universities, because those are closer to my own, working life as a leader. I can't even imagine the level of huge, huge challenge that it would pose to those cities and to those residents to suddenly not have access to fuel.
So think about the fact that this nation has a number of people that operate in cyberspace and they see what's going on. And if there was some way that they saw what was going on, and if they could anonymously and securely provide that information back to some central point of the government, and the government could then warn people before ransomware hit, think about what a difference that would make.
And you've called these people white hats, right?
White hat hackers. White hat hackers. It's fantastic. And I would tell you that, we want to be able to leverage that community that is interested in helping, but want to do it in a manner that doesn't necessarily shine an attention on them.
And do white hat hackers sit happily trying to chase down the bad guys because it's fun, or because they feel a sense of duty, or because they're just really good at what they do? I
think a little bit of all of those, right? I think that is a really good description of, the DNA that makes up a very, very good white hat hacker. And my thought is, hey, if you're really good at that, and if you really see it, and if you could provide us warning, why wouldn't we want to work with you? And so let's figure out how we do that. And that's a little bit of, the work that we've done at the Wicked Problems Lab, and being able to then say, okay, who in government should get this? And how should we do it in a manner that can do this securely, and then being able to transmit this very rapidly to a series of different potential victims? That's the idea of taking a really hard problem, having some type of pragmatic solution, and then getting to an outcome.
And is there a way for people to be recognized as quiet heroes, and for that problem to be solved, and no one knows that it's happened, right? You've essentially solved a crisis before it's become a crisis. How does that work in terms of morale, or in terms of being able to motivate and mobilize people? So
I think there's just a general sense, within the internet community, that the government just hasn't done enough, and it's not going to be able to do everything we need to. And so I think being part of that is, in many times, reward in and of itself. And being able to do that in a manner that you see, hey, this really is contributing to an open and free internet, is one of the things that I think is also part of the DNA of white hat hackers.
Yeah, I stepped up, and I'm continuing to maintain this as a system that's open and fair.
That's right.
Fascinating. I think,
and then you have to have a really cool name, right? How about Wicked Problems Lab, and then being able to shine that and brand that, and being able to say, oh, we're part of Vanderbilt University and Institute of National Security. That gives us great pride.
Amazing. And is it also strangely circuitous in terms of you're not contracting with a trusted provider of those services? You're using somewhat, what I would think of as sort of the irregular troops, right? Like a group of individuals who don't follow in the standard, you will NDA, you will follow the non-disclosure agreement of your corporate employer. How does, that sense of building a system or a solution?
So I'm an economist at heart. And I look at it as saying, oh my gosh, we're doing this at a fraction of the cost.
Yeah.
Almost no cost.
Fascinating.
And it's like,
right.
if we provide just the seed corn here, think about how popular this could be. And doing this in a manner that I think not only ensures a free and open internet, but also provides a degree of security for those of us that really have to rely on these goods and services. You mentioned rural hospitals. I mean, think about a rural hospital getting hit by a ransomware attack and, the impact that it has with a hospital that probably has very, very small margins,
right.
A hospital that probably doesn't have the information technology staff that can be able to address this. This gives me great joy in terms of thinking about how powerful this can be in the future.
Yeah. I mean, breaking open the fear that threats like that are only going to lead to pessimistic or scary outcomes, right? And very hopeful in the sense of, or at least optimistic in the sense of seeing a solution and then actually demonstrating that solution is not just possible, but actually implementable,
right.
Feasible, can be done soon. Any other of those wicked problems that you wish to share?
So we're looking at critical infrastructure, not only just ransomware, but we're looking at, as you know, Cybele, 16 different elements of critical infrastructure in our country. One of the things that we're looking at is how do we take one of those elements of critical infrastructure and then apply some very, very basic technology to be able to drive higher standards in terms of how they secure their networks and data, but also this idea of...
And when you're talking critical infrastructure, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Think about water, think about power,
electricity,
think about our financial industry, think about our transportation industry, our
electronic banking.
Defense industrial base,
okay.
Exactly. And in these 16 different sectors, some of them are well-resourced and some of them are not.
Yeah.
And so if we can provide this advantage, this competitive advantage that, hey, we're being able to really eliminate this concern about, basic threats to your network and data, think how different that could be. And so I'll look forward to coming back hopefully in the future and talking about some of the successes that we've had at the Wicked Problems Lab.
That's great. And I think our minds often jump in sort of standard, sort of sci-fi way to technology meaning machines. And we don't often think about technology meaning bioterrorism or biopharma or things pertaining to, food supply or our, health. How do we think about that in sort of soft systems? Do we only really think about security in terms of hardware and software? But what do we do with security in sort of the more in the natural world?
It's a great question. And I was just, thinking about really the critical component across all of those descriptions is the fact that you have to have talent. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
I ran an agency, the National Security Agency, that has incredible technology, really fascinating tradecraft. But at the end of the day, the most important thing was talent. And so coming back to the Wicked Problems Lab, let me talk about the talent. Whether or not it's faculty,
how does it work?
Faculty here at Vanderbilt, whether or not it's, people from the private sector that we've been able to recruit to come in, or whether or not students. And interesting, we have one of our best computer science majors who shared with us the other day, every single day I go in there, I feel like I am the least capable person of them all. And, one of the things we talk about is the fact that this is exactly the power of being able to work in radical partnerships because you learn so much from others.
Yeah.
Leaving this institution.
And what was the computer science major telling you about?
And she was just telling me about working with these people that, had spent, a career looking at information technology and the way that you secure systems and thinking about, oh my gosh, I'm just in my third year at Vanderbilt and I just had this many computer science classes.
Right.
But I think the point of it here is that, you leave an institution with that experience and that ability to have worked with people that have that type of talent. This is nothing but really goodness for you.
Yeah, who mentor you and support you and figure out with you what you want to do next.
We learn from education. We learn from, operational experiences. We learn from self-development. All of those three are really important. But I would tell you, just coming out and having seen it and done it, there's nothing that replaces that.
No, that's great. Totally great. In terms of this year's summit focusing on AI and national security, what opportunities and risks do you see emerging from quantum computing, for example, from AI? What are some of the topics that you're most excited about in this year's conference?
A couple things that we're obviously very excited about. First of all is to hear really thought leaders like, first of all, Sam Altman. And then at lunchtime tomorrow, we're going to have Chris Miller, who wrote the book Chip War, talk about the semiconductor industry and just the importance of semiconductors to everything we do in our life. But the other piece that's interesting is being able to listen to the panels, the 6 different panels that will take place throughout the 2 days. One panel that talks about, hey, what's AI's impact on the world and our national security. One that talks about, hey, what's AI's impact on biopharma?
Yeah.
What is it going to be in terms of this disruptive technology being able to bring such huge advancements in drug discovery or being able to understand really disease prevention? We have a panel that I'm going to lead with our Indo-PACOM partners. So our Indo-Pacific partners from both Japan and Singapore to talk about, hey, Japan, Singapore, Australia, how do you see artificial intelligence in your region of the world? And then the one that I would share with you that I'm really looking forward to is Lieutenant General retired Tuna Moore is going to tomorrow conclude the last panel and talk about predictions for the future. So tell us what's going to happen in 2025. And guess what? In a degree of transparency, next year we'll say, hey, here's what the panel said. How well did they do? So we're very, very excited. And not to mention, not only Senator Marsha Blackburn, but also Chairman and Congressman Mark Green going to be able to appear on day 2. It's a fantastic 2 days.
Amazing lineup. Yeah. Amazing. And in terms of predicting the future, back to those unknown unknowns, right? The unknowable unknowns. Would you think that you're going to hit that about 40% correctly in terms of prediction or 90% correctly? How much do you feel that you can actually see around the corner?
Yeah, I think that, again, one of the things that we have to do, and we just are releasing a paper today on red teaming and being able to, end the echo chamber of what happens in some of the efforts that we try to do to get after problems. I think we need to have these type of discussions, right? What are the different experts really thinking about as they look to both the opportunities and challenges of this really important technology, but also what are the opportunities and challenges that we have to do here in academia and also we have to do as a broader nation to ensure we have the positives and minimize the negatives?
Yeah. I think you consistently really hit this point about being nimble, right? Being cognitively and technically nimble to address whatever that threat is or whatever that challenge is. And I find that really inspiring. I think often people think of academia as very slow moving or very committed to going deep and not necessarily to pivoting. And, that's clearly a key feature of so much of what you've just discussed.
In the aftermath of COVID-19, one of the things that I asked all of the leaders within the National Security Agency was, okay, so how many crises can we handle? How many crises can we handle?
And did you come?
And so we can handle one.
Yeah.
Why can't we handle 6? Why can't we handle 8? And it comes back to your point. I use the word agility. I want to think about how do we become much more agile as an institute, much more agile as a university. And one of the ways we become much more agile is the fact that, first of all, we have really good technology that allows us to think and take in data much differently. Secondly, we have a series of partners that we've been able to say, hey, what are you seeing out there? What's going on here? What do we compare notes here in terms of being able to end this echo chamber? And the third part always comes back to education and training. How do you ensure the people that you're working with are at the top of their game? And they really understand how to do critical thinking well. They're very, very good communicators, and they have a strong degree of curiosity. Those are things that allow us to have greater agility. But I would tell you that in the world in which we live today, there's going to be much more information tomorrow than there was yesterday. And I think that's one of the things that we're going to have to be able to do is to figure out how we're going to process that and find the critical information that we need to be able to act on.
Yeah, I see that even with using Gen AI, for example, with my own team. It's taking us a lot longer to read the output than it does to write the prompt, right? And so how do we build in the patience to actually really take in and critically evaluate the output, right? And I think that notion of when to go fast and when to slow down enough to actually interpret the content is going to be a challenge for us. We're getting used to things moving fast, right?
Perhaps you can identify with this. When I was in college, I remember spending an inordinate amount of time on thinking about what I needed to major in. Do I major in this? Do I major in that? Do I minor in this? Do I double major? These were all questions that were just like, coming at
bouncing around.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly, in my mind. And then it was really interesting. I graduated and no one ever asked me, hey, Paul, what'd you major in?
No.
But what they did want is they did want someone that could think critically.
Yes.
They did want someone that had an ability to communicate, and they did want someone that had a curiosity to be able to
approach that problem creatively.
Exactly, right.
See it from a different perspective.
And so it didn't matter what I majored in.
Yeah.
It was the fact that I was able to think critically and I was able to communicate, and I had a degree of curiosity that was really important.
Yeah. Amazing. I'm so excited for you for this next few days. And I really want to wish you the best in that level of creativity and that level of productivity and that level of inspiring problem solving. I think it's just an amazing lineup. And I'm thanking you so much for bringing that kind of leadership here to Vanderbilt, but also together in the world for that kind of conversation.
So that's a little bit about, bringing the world to Vanderbilt.
Yeah. Yeah.
but also us being able to, in the future, bring Vanderbilt to the world. And I think that's an
absolutely.
important piece of what we do.
Yeah, fascinating too to think about, Singapore was not in my mental map as a partner, and that's just great to expand that. Looking ahead in terms of the next 5 to 10 years, what does success look like for you, for the Institute, for Vanderbilt, and for this area of national security?
Well, I think as we take a look at our 4 pillars, whether or not it's educate, innovate, convene, or advise, the next 5 years really is, in terms of how we educate across both the undergraduate, the graduate, and the executive ed program. So I think within the next year or two, you're going to see programs and all that. In the past 6 months, we were able to develop a minor. Now, I'm not sure how that's done at other universities, but I was a little surprised we could do that very
fast.
And so I was really proud of
that. To everyone that worked with you and to you for really leading it.
And I think that as we take a look at innovate, this is going to be the signature issue of bringing Vanderbilt to the world. This is the wicked problems. This is being able to take a look and saying, hey, what's going on? And then convene. I think it's not only convening here in Nashville, but I would see convening in our nation's capital, convening overseas. I think there's an opportunity for us to be able to bring what we've been able to do in this 2-day summit to different places to be able to talk about it. And then the advise piece, really 2 parts to that. And I see in the next 5 years, it's not only the fact that we are really being able to satisfy our number one customer, the undergraduate student here, and being able to advise and assist them and being able to educate them in a manner that provides success in their futures. But it's also this idea that, hey, in the future, maybe there's someone in DC that's going to pick up the phone and say, hey, wonder what Vanderbilt's thinking today on this issue. That's going to be the success. And I think that will come as well.
Amazing. And just to take a minute on that point, I think a lot about how much so many of our faculty play a key role in that advising capacity, that in having conversations with people on the Hill, whether it's congressional leaders, whether it's policy leaders. Is it the case that you find mid-career professionals in policy and politics excited about AI or feeling beleaguered and stressed that they didn't catch up enough in computer science back in the day when they were undergrads?
So I think there's really one of 3 ways that I see folks as they look at artificial intelligence. I look at any new technology. It's either adapt or adopt or it's avoid.
Yeah.
We want to make sure it's adapt or adopt. Think about 2007 when Steve Jobs launches, the iPhone, how much that has changed exactly what we do in our lives today.
Yeah.
And the companies and the folks that adapted and adopted to it, they're huge today.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that was less than 20 years ago.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And so that's what I look for. And that's what we're trying to enhance is that adapt and adopt. I think that's really important.
And I think, many times the public perception of a university is very undergraduate focused. And it's not as focused on the ways in which we can really promote lifelong learning, the ways that we can really support and advise senior leaders as well as mid-career professionals. So I'm very grateful for you carrying that message to the Hill and to other places around the world. It's really great. In terms of one message you'd like to have listeners take away from this conversation, Paul, what is that call to action that you would really like to place out into the stratosphere, into the world?
I come back to Cybele, this idea of the world in which we live today has incredible amount of opportunities and a lot of challenges. And the way that we get after the challenges is through a series of partnerships. Remember the 3 circles that I talked about, whether or not it's government, whether it's the private, or whether or not it's academia. Hey, this is our circle. Let's make sure that we're part of that solution because those problems aren't going to go away. And these opportunities are here for us to be able to leverage today.
Thanks to our listeners for tuning in. Remember to stay curious and keep exploring new ideas. We'll be back next time with another guest who's pushing the boundaries of discovery. Until then, I'm Cybele Raver, and this is Quantum Potential.
The Quantum Potential podcast comes from Vanderbilt University. Your host is C. Cybele Raver.
Thank you to our guest, retired General Paul Nakasone.
Production by Matriarch Digital Media. For more information about Quantum Potential, go to vanderbilt.edu/quantum potential. Stay curious.